Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about Crone Helleborn of the Dark Elves and how to play her campaign in Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. Crone Helleborn is probably the least popular of the Dark Elven Legendary Lords and probably has been that case from the moment she was launched, though she does have a decent amount of potential in her campaign, but there's plenty of strings attached to that. Now, I understand a lot of people dislike the slave mechanic of the Dark Elves. They find it annoying to deal with. You feel like you constantly have to be on defensive just to keep your economy going. That is all very well and good. Now, from my perspective, when it comes to dealing with the slave mechanic, I don't necessarily see that as an issue because the best way to play the game at the moment is to be very, very aggressive. And certainly the Dark Elves are not going to reward you if you're going to be a passive player. It just won't work all that well. Now, with that in mind, let's talk about Hellebron. She can engage in the sacrifice to Drukera, which improves Death Hags and Witch Elves, plus bonuses for all armies versus High Elves. If we're looking at the right, we're looking at leadership and weapon strength when fighting against the High Elves. That can be very, very useful. Then you get plus 25% more casualties captured per spell, so that is more slaves. She also starts with 500 faction slave capacity, which is always nice, starting with the extra capacity right off the bat. Slave cost minus 33% for sacrifice to Cain, and hero capacity plus 2 for Death Hags. Death Hags are great because they give you replenishment, and starting with a hero that gives you replenishment is always a nice bonus to have. Then looking at Hellebron's skill line, she gets an upkeep benefit for Witch Elves, Sisters of Slaughter, and Harganeth Executioners. You almost never want to use these units in your campaign. The reason you don't want to use these units is that while certainly they can do a good amount of damage, they also will take a ridiculous amount of damage as well. In particular from range because, well, Harganeth Executioners, even though they have a high level of armor, they obviously don't have a shield, so any units without shield like that, they're just going to take a great deal of damage from range units. Now, looking at her army skill line, she can get Manticore and Cauldron of Blood. Decent enough mount options that you have that give you a decent amount of flexibility on the battlefield. Then you get physical missile resistance for Witch Elves and Harganeth Executioners, and physical resistance, Gaze of Cain ability as well. And the Gaze of Cain, what it does is it gives you base weapon damage, armor piercing damage, melee attack, leadership, and the rampage effect. Then more benefits for those units. But again, even with these benefits, even with the physical resistance and the missile resistance, maybe a couple of them, sure, to be sure, but not necessarily making a full stack of them. You're still going to end up in a much better situation by focusing on Black Ark Corsairs and Dark Shards with shields. You might ask, well, Black Ark Corsairs don't have a shield, right? So why would you use them? Yes, but they're much, much easier to get access to. But right, sure, you could possibly make a melee stack of Harganeth Executioners. They're pretty cheap in her army, but I admit I would not necessarily see much of a reason to focus on those units. And I think the better playstyle to do with her is to actually get a bunch of Dark Shards, Dread Spears, and Black Ark Corsairs. Then you get casualties captured post-battle, loyalty plus 2 for new recruits faction-wide. So when you're recruiting a new lord, you're going to have a loyalty benefit. That's always sweet to have. Hit points, regeneration, always good as a melee ability. Now, Hellebron, if you've ever played the campaign against her, especially as a Leafanar, you know she is absolutely insane. But that's because the AI doesn't require slaves to keep their economy going, and Hellebron has a lot of benefits. So you can summon a Blood Voyage when you do a Death Knight. And this Blood Voyage is Rogue Army. You're also getting more physical resistance and vigor loss reduction. So I guess adding all of that together, sure. You know, you might find a good enough reason for it. But I admit I'm still skeptical with regards to using these units in the campaign. The benefit, though, of the Blood Queen is that your armies and those of Blood Voyages will replenish slowly even in unowned territory, which is always nice. Foreign replenishment is always great. Even more loyalty, control, and leadership. The control in particular is great because the Dark Elves certainly suffer a great deal from the lack of control because they will get a lot of slaves, and so you'll have a significant control deficit. Morathi deals with this by having Slaaneshi corruption in her campaign, which obviously buffs control for her. You deal with it by having a faction-wide benefit as long as you keep this meter up. Though keep in mind, this is going to create issues as you're going through the entire campaign. Now, one of the things to achieve very quickly in a campaign as the Dark Elves is to actually get a port pretty quickly, because you want to get that Black Ark as quickly as possible, and you don't actually have a lot of options for that. You do start a war with this minor greenskin faction. They're not going to be able to stand up to you. They do have 2 armies, but those armies are very weak. This one you'll destroy completely in your first turn, then you'll take this entire province very quickly, and then march east and take Nagar. And then maybe you want to race against Sigvald to take the frozen city, and maybe make some deal with Sigvald, because if you have to fight Sigvald, while you certainly can win, it isn't necessarily beneficial to your campaign to march east. In fact, you might want to march west. You do need to eliminate Morathi, which I find absolutely ridiculous as I personally see it, and then you need to eliminate the High Elven factions, which does make sense. Now, there are a couple of things to keep in mind. You do have the ability over here in this particular province to generate a ridiculous amount of money in this campaign, because between the settlements, the base economic structure of the Dark Elves can give you 300 income at level 1 as long as you have slaves, going all the way to 700. That's the reason Hellebron's so crazy when you're dealing with her, because she'll take these 2 provinces, or most of these 2 provinces, and then you're going to have to end up dealing with her. Then you can also expand west against Grond, and maybe race against Valkia and maybe defeat Valkia, though she certainly is going to be a hard fight. Or maybe take this province and then march west to deal with Valkia and deal with her quickly enough. In this respect, Sigvald can be an ally in your campaign. The Dark Elves can actually get along quite well with the forces of chaos, so if you make some kind of alliance or non-aggression pact with Sigvald, then he expands east, you deal with the situation over here in the west, and then jump across to deal with the Lifanar, you're going to end up having a great campaign situation. Over here, you'll get a lot of money, you'll get a lot of slaves, you'll keep the economy going. There's some really good provinces next to you, and unlike Malekith, who's wasting a lot of his early game moving across terrain that he doesn't necessarily want, that's unpleasant, just to deal with Grombrindal quickly, and then of course also dealing with Valkia pretty quickly, potentially one way or another in a campaign, you actually have a pretty clear campaign path, though it is annoying that the port is so far away, because that means even if you do start building the structure from the very beginning to unlock the first Black Ark, you're not going to be able to do so for a decent number of turns until you get that port. And this port is the only one that's actually available, with the exception of course, Nagarond. I guess you could jump across the sea and get the Blacklight Tower before Lifanar, or fight him for it, because the Blacklight Tower does have a pretty solid enough garrison from the beginning. They'll put up a decent enough fight against Lifanar, so you can potentially sneak up on the Stealth Boy and take him out when he's besieging the settlement. They won't usually directly assault the settlement the moment they start sieging it. They'll siege it for a couple of turns, and they'll attack. So that gives you an opportunity to, one, eliminate this garrison if you fight the battle manually, because they'll die against the Lifanar, then eliminate the Lifanar's army, and then take this entire province, this entire territory for yourself. There's also another great province over here in Clarent Corond, because this landmark at tier 4 is amazing with 100 exotic animals resource production. That's a lot of trade income that you will be generating there in your campaign. So I certainly don't think much of Hellebron's army focus. I do think her campaign does have a great deal of potential. I think Morathi is better than her, but even though Hellebron is, as I said, very unpopular, and the Dark Elves are currently very unpopular, I do actually think Hellebron does have a great deal of potential in her campaign. It is annoying to have to eliminate Morathi, because obviously it would be much better to confederate her, gain her territory, but probably eliminating her is for best, because you then, if you confederated her, you'd obviously get all that bloody Sunaishi corruption, which for you is a negative. And the Blood Voyage can help you out in some situations, though don't expect the Blood Voyage to do much. I think it would be better if we could control it, though you only can use it for a certain amount of time to attack Ulfwan. And maybe its duration gets lengthened if you do succeed against Ulfwan. It's always annoying to go against Hellebron, because she's going to get that Blood Voyage. If you're playing Alariel, you're going to have to deal with that, and you're going to have to deal with multiple armies of Hellebron coming, breathing down your neck. In point of fact, in the entire North, I consider Hellebron the most substantial AI threat to deal with in a campaign, just because she gets all these provinces. The Dark Elves do well with a lot of territory. Their income skyrockets. So that's where the issue is in terms of dealing with her. And you can certainly use all of those things to your own advantage in a campaign as Hellebron. That's all there is to say. Costine signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.